Picture the early days of Hollywood, an era filled with larger-than-life personalities and stories that feel almost too strange to be real. Among them stands one unforgettable image: Douglas Fairbanks boldly sprinting across a film set without a care in the world. It sounds unbelievable, even absurd, yet for those who knew his spirit, it wasn't entirely surprising. Fairbanks wasn't just another actor with a few harmless quirks, he was a force of nature, a man whose personality often blurred the line between performance and reality. People have long referred to him as the King of Hollywood, a title that carries both admiration and contradiction. Because what kind of king lives a life filled with restless passion, shifting loyalties, and complicated relationships? Fairbanks was known for his charm, but also for leaving behind chapters of his personal life as quickly as he embraced new ones. His story is not just one of fame and glory, but also of inner conflict. A deeper, quieter struggle that began long before the cameras ever found him. To understand the man, you have to look back at his childhood. It was during those early, fragile years that the seeds of insecurity were planted. Beneath the confident smile and athletic grace was someone who carried emotional weight, someone who battled doubts that never fully disappeared. Even small details, like his strong aversion to alcohol, hint at experiences that shaped him in ways the public rarely saw. These hidden struggles would follow him, even as he rose to unimaginable heights. And rise he did. Despite everything, Douglas Fairbanks became more than just a star. He became a symbol. At a time when actors were expected to maintain flawless public images, he broke away from the rigid mold imposed by powerful studios. In those days, performers were seen as moral figures, almost untouchable in the eyes of the audience. Studios carefully crafted their reputations, protecting them at any cost because millions of dollars, and the illusion of perfection, depended on it. Fairbanks challenged that system. He stepped outside the boundaries, bringing authenticity and individuality into an industry that thrived on control. But that freedom came with consequences. The Hollywood stars of that era were often treated like gods, shaping the blueprint for future generations. And among those pioneers, Fairbanks stood tall as one of the most influential figures, helping define what it meant to truly captivate an audience. Of course, his talent wasn't limited to charisma alone. Fairbanks was, above all, an athlete. He believed deeply in his physical abilities and insisted on performing his own stunts, pushing his body to its limits in pursuit of excellence. There's even a story, strange yet fitting, that during the construction of a studio, he envisioned an underground track where he could run freely between takes. It paints a vivid picture of a man constantly in motion, driven by energy that refused to be contained. But there was more to him than strength and stamina. Fairbanks had a natural flair for performance, a magnetic presence that made every movement feel intentional and alive. He wasn't just acting, he was entertaining, dazzling, and inviting the audience into his world. His flamboyance never felt forced. It carried a sense of joy, as if he genuinely loved every moment under the spotlight. At the same time, there was a hint of vanity, a quiet awareness of his own brilliance. Yet even that seemed to add to his charm rather than diminish it. He wasn't simply showing off, he was celebrating what he could do, embracing the very qualities that made him unique. In many ways, Douglas Fairbanks truly was a king, but not the kind who ruled with perfection. His kingdom was built on passion, talent, and contradiction. And like many great rulers of history, his legacy is not defined by a flawless image, but by the complexity of the man behind it. Look closely at Douglas Fairbanks on screen, and something deeper begins to emerge. His performances weren't just crafted for entertainment, they carried traces of something personal, something unresolved. It's almost as if every role he stepped into became a mirror, reflecting fragments of his own past. If you pay attention, you might notice it too, each character quietly echoing the struggles he rarely spoke about. It feels like a hidden message, one that only reveals itself when you begin to understand the man behind the legend. Take The Good Bad Man for example. In this film, Fairbanks portrays a charming outlaw, part showman, part rebel, a Western-style Robin Hood who steals from the wealthy to care for orphan children. On the surface, it's a heroic tale full of adventure and heart. But beneath it lies something more intimate. The character's actions are driven by insecurity about his origins, a longing to belong. And that wasn't just fiction, it closely mirrored Fairbanks' own inner conflict. Because behind the applause and critical acclaim, there was a personal story that few truly understood. Critics praised the originality of the film and celebrated his performance, but they didn't realize how much of it came from a real place. Fairbanks himself had grown up with lingering doubts about his identity, particularly surrounding his father. Reports suggest that his mother had been married more than once before meeting the man believed to be his father, and their relationship was far from stable. Trust was fragile, and the cracks in that foundation left a lasting impression on a young boy trying to understand where he belonged. That uncertainty followed him into adulthood. It shaped the way he saw himself and, more importantly, the way he expressed himself. But instead of allowing those insecurities to hold him back, Fairbanks did something remarkable. He transformed them into fuel. Acting became his outlet, a way to channel confusion into creativity. And when you watch his performance in When the Clouds Roll By, you can almost sense that emotional undercurrent. In a strange way, his difficult past added depth to his art, making his characters feel more real, more human. In that film, he takes on a completely different role, a wealthy, superstitious young man who becomes the subject of a bizarre scientific experiment. It's a shift from heroic outlaw to psychologically troubled individual, and once again Fairbanks rises to the challenge. His portrayal feels genuine, almost unsettling at times, as if he's tapping into something deeply personal. It's not just acting, it's expression. Then comes Robin Hood, a role that seemed almost destined for him. By this point, Fairbanks had already explored similar characters, but this time, everything came together on a much grander scale. And yet, what truly stood out wasn't just the story or the action, it was his presence. At a time when elaborate costumes were falling out of favor with audiences, Fairbanks embraced them fully. On anyone else it might have felt outdated. But on him it worked. He carried the look with confidence, transforming what could have been a risk into an iconic image. He proved something important in that moment, that he wasn't limited to comedy or lighthearted roles. He had range, power, and the ability to command the screen in entirely new ways. That evolution became even clearer in The Mark of Zorro, a film many consider to be his finest work. As Zorro, Fairbanks stepped into the role of a masked hero, stylish, daring, and driven by a sense of justice. Long before modern superheroes dominated the screen, Fairbanks was already embodying that spirit. In many ways he was ahead of his time, a prototype for the heroes audiences would come to admire decades later. His movements were sharp and precise, his stunts fearless, and his energy unmatched. Watching him, you can't help but feel the excitement he brought to every scene. But there was another side to this story, one that wasn't as heroic. Just as he could bring intensity to his roles, some of that intensity seeped into his personal life. The same man who played noble heroes on screen sometimes struggled in his relationships off-screen. The king that audiences admired wasn't always gentle with those closest to him, and that contradiction would eventually become impossible to ignore. Now, to be clear, this title of king wasn't born from royal blood. Fairbanks didn't come from a line of monarchs. But there was a sense of grandeur surrounding his life, shaped in part by his upbringing. His mother, Ella Adelaide Marsh, came from a wealthy Southern Roman Catholic family. She lived a sheltered life, protected from hardship and unaware of the complexities of the world beyond her home. Her parents believed they were doing the right thing, and in many ways they were. They kept her safe, shielded from harm. But in doing so, they also kept her from understanding reality. And when life finally presented its challenges, she wasn't fully prepared to face them. That contrast, between protection and reality, certainty and doubt, would ripple through the generations. And for Douglas Fairbanks, it became part of the story he would spend his entire life trying to tell, not just through words, but through every role he ever played. The story of Douglas Fairbanks doesn't begin under bright studio lights or roaring applause. It begins in loss, uncertainty, and a chain of events that would quietly shape the man he would become. His mother, Ella Adelaide Marsh, once lived a life of comfort in New Orleans. She was married to a wealthy sugar mill and plantation owner, a man of status and stability. Together they had a child, and for a moment, life seemed secure. But that stability didn't last. When her husband died, everything began to unravel. Grief came first, then came betrayal. Her late husband's business partners saw an opening and seized it without hesitation. They stripped away the family's wealth, leaving Ella with nothing but sorrow and responsibility. Suddenly she was alone, navigating a harsh reality she had never been prepared for. Into this chaos stepped Charles Ullman, a lawyer and a friend of her late husband. He tried to defend her, to restore what had been taken, but even his efforts weren't enough to undo the damage. Left with few options, Ella moved forward. Carrying both grief and a young child, she searched for stability, for companionship, anything to rebuild what had been lost. That's when she met Edward Wilcox, a refined and seemingly dependable man from Georgia. They married, hoping for a fresh start. But appearances can be deceiving. Edward's polished exterior masked a destructive habit. He drank heavily, far beyond what Ella could endure. Though they had a child together, the marriage quickly became unbearable. Once again, Ella turned to Charles Ullman for help. This time, he succeeded in freeing her from a situation she could no longer tolerate. And in the process, something deeper began to grow between them. Charles had been a constant presence, reliable, supportive, and steady. It wasn't long before that trust turned into love. When Charles proposed that they move to Denver, where he had mining interests, Ella agreed. It was a chance to start over, far from the shadows of her past. They arrived in 1881, married the following year, and soon welcomed two sons, Robert and Douglas Ullman. Yes, that Douglas. The boy who would one day be known to the world as Douglas Fairbanks. For a time, life seemed to settle. Charles rebuilt his law practice and managed his business ventures, creating a foundation for the family. But stability once again proved fragile. Something happened, perhaps more than one thing. Accounts differ. One version claims that Charles was a heavy drinker who eventually abandoned the family when Douglas was just 5 years old. Another suggests he left because of financial strain and growing tension within the marriage. Whatever the truth, the outcome was the same. He was gone. And for young Douglas, that absence left a mark. Growing up without a father, surrounded by uncertainty, he began to question his own identity. The confusion, the quiet insecurity, it followed him. In response, Ella made a decisive change. She altered her son's surname from Ullman to Fairbanks, perhaps in an effort to reshape their story, to leave the past behind. But names can only do so much. The emotional scars remained, subtly influencing the boy as he grew. Yet this wasn't a story meant for sympathy. Because Douglas Fairbanks was far more than his struggles. Even as a child, there was something magnetic about him, a natural charm that drew people in. He wasn't pitied. He was admired. Especially by women who found his energy and confidence irresistible. And that admiration wasn't born from tragedy, it was earned through presence, personality, and undeniable charisma. From an early age, it became clear that Douglas had a passion for performance. Acting wasn't just an interest, it was an instinct. He began appearing in amateur theater productions in Denver, quickly finding his footing on stage. He performed at the Elitch Theater during summer stock seasons and took part in productions supported by Margaret Feely, who ran an acting school for young talent. It was the perfect environment for someone like him to grow. School, however, was a different story. Fairbanks had little patience for it. His interests were elsewhere, and his behavior reflected that. At Denver East High School, he gained a reputation, not for academic excellence but for mischief. One incident in particular stood out. He cut the strings of the school piano. A bold, almost theatrical act that ultimately led to his expulsion. For Douglas, it didn't seem like a setback. By the age of 11, he was already earning money through acting, contributing to his family, and receiving offers that validated his path. Still, beneath the confidence, there was a quiet regret. Later in life, he would claim to have attended prestigious institutions like the Colorado School of Mines and even Harvard University. But those claims weren't true. They were, perhaps, an attempt to fill a gap, to present a version of himself that matched the expectations of others. Determined to make a name for himself, Fairbanks set his sights on Broadway. But success didn't come instantly. He toured with a theatrical company for 2 seasons, gaining experience both on stage and behind the scenes as an assistant stage manager. Then, at 17, he made the leap to New York City. His first Broadway role came in Her Lord and Master. It was a step forward but not yet a breakthrough. To support himself, he took on various jobs, working as a clerk on Wall Street, even spending time in a hardware store. It was a grind, but he stayed focused. Then came his chance. Fairbanks landed a role in A Gentleman from Mississippi, a popular production that ran for an entire year. It brought him recognition, stability, and something else entirely: love. In 1907, he married Anna Beth Sully in Indiana. She was the daughter of a wealthy industrialist, Daniel J. Sully. Within 2 years, they had a son, and Fairbanks began working for his father-in-law. Life seemed to be aligning, yet something within him remained restless. The stage had given him a start, but it wasn't where his destiny lay. In 1914, an opportunity arrived that would change everything. The Triangle Film Corporation offered him a role in motion pictures. Without hesitation, Fairbanks accepted. It was a bold move into a new and uncertain medium, but one that would define his legacy. Working in Hollywood, he collaborated with the renowned filmmaker D.W. Griffith. Their relationship wasn't smooth at first. Griffith struggled to understand Fairbanks' athletic style, his energy, his physicality, his willingness to push boundaries. After working together on The Lamb, it seemed unlikely they would continue. But the audience had other plans. They loved him. And eventually even Griffith came around. The two would go on to collaborate again, recognizing the unique spark Fairbanks brought to the screen. He wasn't like other actors. He performed his own stunts, handsprings, rope swings, rooftop leaps, all with a smile that made it look effortless. It wasn't just performance, it was spectacle. Still, his early film roles didn't immediately reflect the swashbuckling hero he would later become. Instead, he found himself in comedies and romantic films, often written and directed by Anita Loos and John Emerson. These roles showcased his charm and humor, but they only hinted at his full potential. Then came a turning point, both professionally and personally. In Hollywood, he met Mary Pickford, one of the most beloved actresses of the time. Their connection was immediate, intense, and impossible to ignore. But there was a complication: they were both married. What followed was a secret affair hidden from the public eye. They continued their relationship quietly, aware of the scandal it could cause if revealed. As World War I began, Fairbanks, Pickford, and Charlie Chaplin joined efforts to support the war by promoting Liberty bonds. Publicly, they were patriotic icons. Privately, Fairbanks and Pickford's relationship deepened. They considered leaving their spouses, but fear held them back. Fear of public backlash, of damaging their carefully maintained images. Yet they didn't stop. At the time, Pickford and Chaplin were the highest paid stars in the industry, with Fairbanks close behind. His rise had been rapid. Within just 3 years he had become one of Hollywood's top earners. Alongside his acting career, he even wrote a book that performed well in the market, further solidifying his influence. But as their power grew, so did the tension with the studios. The major studios weren't comfortable with actors earning such high salaries. To regain control, they began tightening their grip, monopolizing distribution and exhibition in ways that limited the stars' independence. It was a calculated move, designed to remind actors who really held the power. For most, it would have worked, but not for Fairbanks. He refused to be controlled. And in a move that would change the industry forever, he joined forces with Mary Pickford, Charlie Chaplin, and D.W. Griffith to create United Artists in 1919. It was a revolutionary step, one that gave them full control over their work, from production to distribution. For the first time, actors weren't just performers, they were creators, decision-makers, and owners. It was a bold declaration of independence. And it worked. United Artists broke the studio system's hold, allowing these pioneers to shape their own careers and reap the rewards of their success. It redefined what was possible in Hollywood and inspired generations to come. Douglas Fairbanks wasn't just a star, he was a trailblazer. A man who turned personal struggle into creative power, who challenged authority, and who helped build a new path for artists everywhere. And in doing so, he didn't just play kings on screen. He became one in his own right. By the late 1910s, Douglas Fairbanks had reached a turning point. The battle between rising stars and powerful studios was intensifying, and he found himself with little room left to maneuver. Breaking away wasn't just a bold move, it felt like the only move. Having already helped sell Liberty bonds during the war, he now faced a much more personal storm, one that would shake his carefully built image. At home, his marriage was unraveling. His wife, Anna, could no longer the rumors and the growing distance between them. Hurt and betrayed, she did something that few could have predicted: she went public. The news spread quickly. The beloved hero, the symbol of charm and integrity, was now at the center of a scandal. Headlines whispered about infidelity, and speculation ran wild. When Anna revealed that the other woman was a colleague, the public didn't hesitate. All eyes turned toward Mary Pickford. For Pickford, the fear was immediate. She knew what this could mean, not just for her career but for her reputation. At the time, she was America's sweetheart, adored by millions. A scandal of this magnitude could destroy everything. Meanwhile, Anna finalized her divorce from Fairbanks, closing one chapter, but opening another far more complicated one. Fairbanks, however, didn't hesitate. He wanted to marry Pickford, and he made that clear. But there was one problem: she was still married. Unwilling to wait, he pushed her to make a choice: him or her husband. It was a defining moment. Pickford chose Fairbanks. To finalize her divorce, she traveled to a small town in Nevada, where laws made the process quicker. But even that decision sparked controversy. Her actions became the subject of public debate, with lawmakers questioning the ease of divorce laws. It wasn't just a personal decision anymore, it had become a national conversation. The tension built as the couple prepared to face the public. But when the moment finally came, the reaction was unexpected. Instead of backlash, there was excitement. In 1920, Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford were married, and the public embraced them. The union of everybody's hero and America's sweetheart felt almost mythical. Audiences didn't just accept them, they celebrated them. Across the United States and even in Europe, the couple was treated like royalty. And in many ways they lived like it too. After their honeymoon, they returned to their grand estate, Pickfair, a sprawling mansion that symbolized their status at the top of Hollywood. It wasn't just a home, it was a palace, a gathering place for the industry's elite. Rumors swirled about their life there, adding to the mystique that surrounded them. Together, they became the ultimate power couple of early Hollywood. Professionally, Fairbanks continued to rise. But success didn't make him complacent. He remained deeply committed to changing the industry for the better. Alongside Pickford, Charlie Chaplin, and others, he helped create the Motion Picture Relief Fund, offering support to actors struggling financially. He also played a key role in founding the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in 1927, serving as its first president. Yet behind the success, cracks began to form. As time passed, Fairbanks' attention began to drift. Younger women were drawn to his charm, and he didn't always resist. Pickford, meanwhile, faced relentless scrutiny from the media. They constantly reminded her that she was aging, that her image was fading. The pressure took its toll. At the same time, the film industry itself was changing. The arrival of talkies, films with synchronized sound, marked the end of an era. For silent film stars like Fairbanks and Pickford, it was a difficult transition. Their style, once celebrated, now felt out of place in a new, more mechanical format. Fairbanks' physical, energetic performances didn't translate easily to this evolving medium. They tried to adapt. In The Taming of the Shrew, they attempted a comeback together. But it didn't work. The film failed to capture the magic they once had. By 1933, it was clear, their reign was ending. Fairbanks stepped away, his place in Hollywood gradually taken by a new generation of stars, including Clark Gable. But the loss wasn't just professional. His marriage to Pickford also began to crumble. With more time on his hands and less focus on his career, he drifted further away from her. His behavior, frequent absences, endless distractions, left her feeling alone. Eventually, Pickford made the decision to leave. The king and his queen had fallen. Not long after, Fairbanks remarried. His new wife, Lady Sylvia Ashley, had once been his mistress. Together they traveled the world, living a life that seemed glamorous on the surface. But beneath it all, there was something else, something unresolved. The constant movement, the endless journeys, it felt less like freedom and more like escape. And then, the consequences caught up with him. Years of heavy smoking began to take their toll. His health declined and eventually he suffered a heart attack. This time there was no recovery. Douglas Fairbanks, the man who had once leapt across rooftops and captured the imagination of millions, was gone. But his legacy didn't fade with him. He would always be remembered as more than just a star. He was a pioneer, a man who challenged the system and helped free actors from the control of powerful studios. At a time when the industry was rigid and unforgiving, he carved out a new path, one that gave artists a voice and a sense of ownership over their work. His story, filled with triumph, scandal, love, and loss, remains a defining chapter in Hollywood history. And even today, long after the spotlight has dimmed, the king's influence still echoes across the screen.